Hey guys. There for a second, I didn't think this was going to work. It did not want to come on. um, yeah. Hey, writing down the rabbit hole. How are you today? I'm about to get started here. I'm just gonna pulling up a few things first. And it would be a lot easier if I knew what I was doing. Hey, Crafted Evidence Podcast. I'm doing pretty good. Yeah, it's been a good Sunday for me. So I don't really know how to use that B-roll. I see there's one video in there. I'll figure that out in a little while. But I do have a lot of stuff to cover today. I don't know that I'll be able to get through it all, but I think it's going to be an interesting video today. Hey, Molly, how are you doing? We're about to get started. So actually, I think I can share my screen somehow, but I try not to look at my own face. I just got to see that it's working and then I cover it up. So, hello, everyone, and welcome once again to Timeless Mysteries, or the replay if you're catching this late. Again, you know who you are, but that's okay. I'm Robert, and tonight I'm focusing on the horrifying events of August 12th and 13th, 2018, as we explore the case of Chris Watts and his wife Shanann and their two young daughters, Bella and Celeste. It's a case that changed how many of us view ordinary households, husbands, and fathers. Before I dive into the timeline, I want to remind you to stay engaged. Feel free to drop your thoughts into the comments and, let me know you're still watching. And if you got questions or theories you want to be heard, just let me know and I'll try to keep an eye on that as well. So let's begin with the evening of Sunday, August 12th. On that Sunday night, Chris Watts was at home with Bella and Celeste. Shanann was away in Arizona for a business trip, texting Chris sporadically throughout the day about flight delays. Meanwhile, Chris settled in for what turned out to be a staggering 111-minute phone call with his mistress, Nichol Kessinger. The call began around 9:28 p.m. and ended close to 11:20 p.m., according to phone records later revealed in the investigation. It was one of the longest calls they ever shared together. Hello, Donna Colvin. How are you doing? We're just getting started. Um, According to the phone records later revealed in the investigation, it was one of the longest phone calls they ever shared. So, what did they talk about? That question has loomed large over everything that has happened over this case. Everyone wants to know this question and find an answer. Um, so, if you're watching this live, I want to hear from you. How significant do you think that late night call might have been? Was it just romantic talk, or was it something more sinister? Feel free to share your thoughts in the chat section. I don't know what to actually call it. Um, yeah, so let's see. After that 111-minute phone call, a few hours later, around 1:48 a.m. on August 13th, Shanann arrived home. She finally landed in Colorado and was dropped off by her friend Nicole Atkinson, right? Atkinson, yes, Atkinson, uh, who watched Shanann walk into a dark house and then she drove away. No one realized that they were witnessing Shanann's last moments alive. Investigative files suggest Chris was still awake. His phone showed little to no downtime, indicating he never really went to sleep. Shanann was over 15 weeks pregnant. She was eager to talk with Chris about issues that they were having. She wanted to work through them, but she had no idea just how strained things had become. Shortly afterward, possibly between 2 and 4 a.m., an argument began. Chris would later claim that Shanann confronted him or that he uh, told her that he wanted to separate. In any case, something triggered a fatal outcome. By his own confession, he strangled Shanann in their bedroom. Bella, who was 4, and Celeste, who was 3, were reportedly asleep or at least unaware of the initial violence. Shanann had no defensive wounds. And that is particularly interesting to me because I can't imagine how somebody wouldn't fight back. Um, but she had no defensive wounds, which paints a very tragic picture of how quickly this escalated and ended. The next part of the timeline is where a neighbor's security footage becomes critical. At 5:27, Chris backed his truck into the driveway. A strange move considering he typically parked on the street. Investigators later pieced together that he likely used that truck to load Shanann's body and heartbreakingly also took Bella and Celeste, who were possibly, I've heard conflicting information on this, but they were probably still alive at this moment, if you believe what Chris says in his confession interview thing. If you've seen the neighbor's footage or subsequent police body cam footage, then you know how tense and disturbing that morning was. The neighborhood was silent, and no one realized the horror that was unfolding just a few feet away. Somewhere around 6:16 a.m., Nicole Kessinger's cell phone pinged near Frederick, Colorado. She insisted she was on her normal commute to work, and the cell tower data wasn't precise enough to place her in Chris Watts's house. Officially, she's never been charged with any involvement, but as you can imagine, many have debated the meaning of that phone ping ever since. Was she closer than she admitted, or was it some random cell tower quirk? Shortly thereafter, Chris drove roughly 45 minutes to the Survey 319 site, an oil well location managed by his employer. Investigative reports indicate that Bella and Celeste were still in the truck with him, alive and confused, until he murdered them at the site. Forensic evidence and Chris's subsequent confession suggest he buried Shanann in a shallow grave and disposed of Bella and Celeste in the oil tanks. Even describing this feels surreal and yeah, it's hard to imagine somebody doing this to somebody. It's really hard. Um, So I guess I just want to pause here and talk to you guys about this part, and ask How do you personally make sense of a father choosing such a horrific path? Does it speak to a sudden break in reality, or was it cold premeditation? AA, you think she was killed in the basement? I don't think I've actually heard that. I've only heard that she was most likely killed in her bedroom. Yeah, I believe the cell phone tower ping is fairly accurate, but I have read that every once in a while, say for whatever reason, a particular tower that's close by actually like shuts down or resets or does something weird. It can make a quick ping to another tower. Um, I forget what they call that, but there's a term for it. Um, I personally think that she was going to see Chris. I don't know why. You know, there's a million possibilities. We really just don't know why. I know a lot of us think the worst, but it could have been something innocent. You know, maybe she and Chris had a fight and she wanted to go check on him and see if everything was okay. I mean, that's a possibility. And I don't think many people have ever talked about that. Um, you know, maybe she didn't have anything to do with this, but she knew something was up and was curious and, you know, wanted to fix things. It's really hard to say when you start speculating these things. I think it's easier to see the worst possibility than sometimes than the most likely possibility. And sometimes even the most likely possibility isn't what actually happened. Um, that's the nature of speculation. But I think she went there. I don't know why she went there. I I feel like she probably had some kind of like she was probably going to expose the relationship so that Chris would have to um, let Shanann know that things were over with her. That seems very plausible to me. If you've ever been in a relationship with a married person, you know, you always suspect that they're going to leave that person, but there's like statistics that they never do. It's more likely that they're going to reconcile an affair than to get a divorce. So I know there that Chris Watts states that Nichol Kessinger was bipolar and maybe she was having some kind of crazy episode on the phone and she was angry. She could have made threats and thought it was a good idea to follow through with those threats. I don't know. And I don't know much about the dogs. I've heard that there was a dog. I've heard people ask the question, well, what happened to the dog? And in most of my research, I have never come up with, you know, who this dog is. um, but I believe if there was a dog, I haven't heard that it got hurt or anything. But uh, anyway, let me continue with this story. So by 7:40 a.m. that day, Chris was texting his coworkers about an alleged leak at the site, as if everything was normal. He also contacted the girls' school or childcare facility, saying that they would not be attending. You know, I've heard people say that he said it that they weren't going to be coming back. I I believe he most likely said that they wouldn't be there that day. I can't remember if he mentioned exactly what he said to them or not. Investigators seized these unusual uh, actions as the day wore on, suspecting something was terribly off. Meanwhile, Nicole Atkinson grew alarmed when Shanann missed a prenatal appointment, and she wasn't replying to text messages. And this is why it's always important to check on your friends. Some people may have like tried to reach their friend and they're unresponsive, and then they don't do anything. They just think that they're busy. But in this particular case, if Nicole Atkinson had not gone to the house, had not called the police, we might not know of this story the way we do. It's really, I think it's really, what broke the case. If she had not gone to the house, if she had not called the police, if the police hadn't called Chris to come home, we may not have gotten a confession. Uh, I mean, it's just kind of the way I think about it. But, I wish somebody could have called the police before and saved everyone's life. Dieter, that was the dog, I believe, right? Yeah, I can't imagine what he was thinking if he just like went back to his old life like nothing had happened. Anyway, so um, Shanann wasn't texting Nicole Atkinson. So Nicole tried reaching Chris, who claimed Shanann had taken the girls on a play date. She was unconvinced. So Nicole drove over to the Watts home and saw that Shanann's car was still in the garage. And she immediately called the police. She wanted a welfare check. It was 1:40 in the afternoon. Officer Coonrod, I believe, right? That's his name. Anyone know? The officer that responded, was it Coonrod, or is that how you say it? He arrived to find Chris offering feasible explanations, but the tension was palpable. Body cam footage showed Nicole's pressing concern. Shanann's purse, medication, and phone were all still in the house. Thank you, Lauren. Chris gave television interviews, swaying side to side. He's pleading for Shanann and the girls to come home. Many of us who saw that footage live at the time um, remember how this body language seemed a little bit off. I know there's a lot of people who have, um, studied this and in great detail, like Dr. What's his name? Oh my God, Dr. Phil. Wow, I almost forgot Dr. Phil's name. But Dr. Phil did. I think Dr. Oz also did. And then, I mean, there's hundreds of other people who have kind of identified the body language there. But the self-soothing, the rocking, the swaying, the way he's closed off, he's got his arms crossed. Um, he doesn't look concerned. I think that's what I remember. I wasn't really familiar with this case until I think about a year and a half ago when I actually did some research on it. But I remember seeing this on the news. I remember the guy standing in front of his garage. I remember the guy standing on his porch talking to reporters. And, at the time, I just like, just said, oh, okay. I didn't really want to know what happened. Um, but it's insane that he thought that this was a logical plan. I it just it's I don't know why people think they can get away with this stuff. And, obviously some people do kind of get away with it for at least a long time. So where was I? Officer Coonrod had arrived. And there was a bunch of body cam footage, and Chris was giving news interviews. Um, Within a couple of days, Chris failed a polygraph test, and I know many of you have saw this. This polygraph test really like it kind of makes me a little bit. I don't want to say this the wrong way because I'm glad that Chris Watts was he confessed. because of this, but I don't like the way that they put this polygraph on him and suggested that it was 100% infallible evidence that he was guilty. Um, it does say something about him that he believed it, but I guess whenever you've murdered someone and you're kind of like living in this weird headspace that I can't even really imagine, um, it's hard to know how you're going to react to what they say to you. So I think there was a lot of coercion there when they got the confession, but he confessed, and so it didn't go to trial. He didn't want his attorney to try to get it thrown out, which was possible. They could have possibly, depending on the judge, got that confession thrown out, and then it could have been years of court proceedings to find out if he was actually guilty or not. He chose not to. Um, but where was I here? Sorry, I keep skipping around. I've got this kind of all laid out here for you guys. Um, but his story has shifted multiple times. He even tried to claim that Shanann had killed the children and that he only killed her in retaliation. That lie quickly fell apart. He was faced with they had a lot of evidence already. Chris finally confessed to all three murders. And then the bodies were recovered. They found Shanann in a shallow grave, and then both of the girls were found in separate oil tanks. By November of 2018, he pleaded guilty to all charges and received multiple life sentences without the possibility of parole. Now, so we've traced that timeline from that 111-minute phone call on August 12th all the way through his confession. Now, the question that remains is, why did Chris Watts do it? And how does Nichol Kessinger figure into all of this? Was she the driving force pressuring him to fix his situation? Was she an unwitting catalyst? Or did Chris just plan this all on his own? So at this point, I've got these scenarios that I've kind of came up with. I've today I was going through a lot of my stuff that I've written in the past on this case that I haven't made into a video, and I was really surprised at how much stuff I actually have. And let me see, I've got this. So I've basically narrowed down to like three speculative scenarios. And I think most of you have probably talked about this before. I've kind of mentioned some of these things in my videos that I have published on YouTube. Um, but the scenario one, Nichol Kessinger instigated the murders. In this scenario, Nichol Kessinger is the one who directly or indirectly pressured Chris Watts to eliminate his family so that the two lovers could be together without any obstacles. Essentially, proponents of this theory imagine that during the 111-minute phone call, Kessinger gave Chris an ultimatum. I want them gone. If you don't get rid of them, you're going to lose me. Um, she might have explicitly said, I'm going to kill them, or she may have pushed Chris to handle the situation. He did imply that he planned to handle it, but I think he was referring to the idea that he was going to tell Shanann that it was over. But we know what really happened. But the idea that Nichol Kessinger's influence over Chris was so strong at that point that she instigated or encouraged the murders as part of a solution to their predicament. There are a few supporting ideas for this. While there is no direct evidence that Nicole asked Chris to commit murder, there are several pieces of circumstantial information that make this scenario conceivable, at least from my kind of point of view. First, Nicole Kessinger's behavior. The searches in the weeks leading up to the murders show she was getting deeply invested in a future with Chris. Investigators discovered that on July 24th of 2018, Nicole Googled the phrase, "Man I'm having an affair with says he will leave his wife," suggesting she was seeking advice or validation for her situation. Just 2 weeks before the murder on August 4th, she spent over 2 hours searching for wedding dresses online. How can somebody get married if the guy that she's seeing is already married? She's not going to be needing a wedding dress. On August 8th, she searched topics related to marrying your mistress. These searches clearly indicate that Nicole was fantasizing about marrying Chris and that she was anxious about whether Chris would truly leave his wife for her. In short, Kessinger wanted a life with Chris Watts. She wanted it. And, in normal circumstances, maybe that could have been something that could have actually played out where people were just hurt emotionally and, they got past it and lived out their lives. But that's not what happened. We know what happened. She later told the police that she was not in love with Chris at all. She was falling for him and believed that they possibly would have a future together. In text messages recovered by the police, Nicole even told Chris, "Being in your life is something I crave," especially, emphasizing how desperately she wanted to be with him. You know, I always think that's a weird thing to say to somebody. I don't know. Have any of you guys ever heard somebody say something like this? Being in your life is something I crave. Um, I know relationships can be addictive. People can be addictive, but um, I think it's a weird thing to say. Given this mindset, one can imagine that Nicole growing impatient that Chris had not fully severed ties with Shanann. So by August 12th, Shanann was back home from her trip and the Watts marriage was at its crossroads. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant, hoping to save the marriage. And we know this from the text that she was having with one of her friends. Um, Chris was telling Nicole that divorce was imminent. And this was extremely volatile. This was an extremely volatile situation for Chris, essentially a love triangle on the verge of exposure. If Nicole did issue an ultimatum on that Sunday night, for example, it's either me or her, make your choice now, it could have been that final push that led Chris to decide that murder was his only way out. And just saying that gives me goosebumps. I really, I mean, it's just insane. Um, and I lost my place, guys. Sorry. Um, it's also possible that Nicole was angry that Chris had allowed Shanann to return home at all. Perhaps she expected him to separate before Shanann got back from her trip. If Nicole said anything like, "I never want to deal with Shanann or the kids. Um, I wish they'd just disappear." Chris might have taken it literally. Um, I mean, she could have said anything, and that's what I'm trying to get at here. She could have done anything. Um, but I can imagine her saying that she doesn't want to deal with Shanann. She may not have said that about the kids. because I think it's easier to deal with kids, but nobody wants to deal with the ex. You know, it's just if it's awkward, right? Um, but it's worth noting that family annihilators often cite a desire for a clean slate with a new partner. And that's their motive. That's their main motive. Prosecutors in the Watts case explicitly stated that Chris's desire for a fresh start to begin a new relationship with a new love was the driving motive for his crimes. In other words, getting rid of his current family was, in Chris's warped mind, a prerequisite for fully being with Nichol. Scenario one suggests Nichol actively planted or reinforced this idea. Psychologically, Chris Watts was described by those who knew him as passive and um, conflict adverse, someone who hated confrontation. It's conceivable he could be influenced by a dominant personality in an intimate relationship. If Nichol Kessinger was emotionally pressuring him, he may have felt he had to appease her to keep her. There's an eerie parallel in the way Chris behaved. Just as he seemed eager to please Shanann during their marriage until the affair, he appeared eager to please Nichol during the affair. For instance, Nichol mentioned that Chris was always attentive to her needs and was researching things she liked, even looking up love songs and lyrics for her, always trying to impress her. These this compliance could have extended to darker requests. Some observers have even speculated that Nichol might have assisted in some of the planning. For example, Chris admitted to drugging. Actually, I don't think there was anything found in her. Like, I guess the part I did he drug her? That's what I want to know. I think there was some like pain medication in her system, but it wasn't enough um, to actually like register. And I also read that sometimes upon death, your body can manufacture whatever chemical that is and register in an autopsy. Um, but I think there was initially some talk about how he might have drugged her, and that's why she did not fight back. Chris refused to admit anything like this, as far as I know. I have to look at the autopsy again, but I really think there was something that was like that looked like some kind of oh man, I wish I'd have prepared a little more for this. But you know, I'm just kind of going through some of my old stuff that I've written here. Um, there was something about her being drugged or possibly being drugged. Honestly, I think that if she was asleep, she may not have been able to fight back if he, you know, just went all, you know, crazy at once and just squeezed. You know, you can black out within 10 seconds being choked. Um, it's like a blood choke, they call it, where you got these arteries here. If you close them off, you'll black out in 10 seconds or less. Um, you see it in MMA fights a lot where they do the rear naked choke and things, but what they're doing is squeezing on those arteries there. Um, so I kind of suspect that maybe if she didn't fight back and she wasn't drugged, then um, it's possible that he, you know, just was so vicious in that first second that she had no way to, she couldn't even register probably what was happening to her. He had been working out. He seems like anybody know how tall Chris Watts is? I don't think I've ever looked that up, but he looks like a pretty big guy. In back in 2018, you know, he did look fit, and I guess right now, um, He's not fit. He's the opposite of that. But I can't imagine what he could do in prison, besides eat and sleep, really. Yeah, I believe he says that in the statement that he gives to Tammy, that he like climbed on top of her, that she likely thought that he wanted to be intimate, and then he just choked her. I think that's what I remember reading. Um, During the affair, Kessinger also knew a lot about Chris's work sites. She was contracted by the same company. The oil battery where Chris ultimately hid the bodies was very familiar to her. So she knew this site well. And it's just interesting that Chris picked it, and a lot of true crime researchers um, believe that she knew this site and she probably suggested it to him because it was very remote. Um, so if Nicole needed, indeed, instigated the idea of murder, what would be her motive for that? Because if you're thinking about this stuff and you're going down this rabbit hole and you're thinking, well, maybe she was a party to murder. What if she did do these things? But then you got to ask yourself, why would she do these things? What is her motive? The obvious one is removal of obstacles. Yeah, she would win Chris Watts, as Lauren just said. Um, Shanann and the girls stood in the way of a life that she wanted with Chris. There might also have been a financial angle. Shanann had life insurance, and an affair partner might think irrationally that eliminating the spouse could lead to a financial payout and making his life easier. And I've never mentioned the financial fraud idea here, but I believe that had she disappeared, I don't think he would have necessarily, like if he'd have got away with this, if he would have told everybody she left him and he wanted them to come back and they just kept looking for her forever, I don't think he ever would have gotten insurance money from her disappearance. I don't know the length of time one has to be disappeared before you can apply for those things, but um, in I just bring it up because that is something to consider. If they found Shanann dead at some point somewhere, and it looked like it was nothing to do with Chris, there could have potentially been a financial payout. Um, One blogger theorized that Kessinger had even considered um, an explosion at the oil site. I don't know how they would blow up an oil tank, but if they did, that would be massive. It's more plausible. The emotional pressure was the key factor in all of this. Nicole may have felt lied to if she discovered that Chris hadn't actually filed for divorce, and she became impatient. She might have been fearful that Chris would stay with his family. Thus, her investment in this affair would have been for nothing. And you see this a lot in the movies. Well, you know, I did all this stuff and now it's all for nothing. Like that's something people get angry about. That's motive for stuff like this. Um, People in such emotional states can issue ultimatums like, I need an answer now. Are you leaving her or not? If we imagine that call, that 111-minute call, perhaps Nicole demanded that Chris prove his love and resolve the situation immediately. And under that stress, the failing marriage plus the financial debt, the new baby, um, on the new baby. I don't think he even wanted the new baby. I think that was another like thing that happened to him. When that when he found out about that baby, he just saw the bills piling up even more. But these stressors, they come from all sides, and it was like a powder keg. Scenario one postulates that Nicole lit the fuse. It's important to acknowledge that Nicole Kessinger denies any such role. Her interviews, she insists that she never wanted anyone hurt and that she was horrified by the murders. I don't think that's what I saw when in her body language when she was saying those things, but she definitely said them. She said she only wanted Chris to legally separate from Shanann. Um, Kessinger even expressed guilt in hindsight, saying her relationship with Chris might have accelerated this process of him doing something awful. Um, that quote is kind of telling. Nicole realized the affair was what likely pushed Chris over the edge, but she frames it in his as his internal problem, not hers. She remarked that Chris's cheese was sliding off the cracker. That one was kind of weird. Investigators also found evidence that Nicole explicitly conspired with Chris. I'm sorry. They never, sorry. There were no text messages about harming Shanann. So yeah, sorry about that. Investigators also never found any evidence to support that she had conspired with Chris. We do know that she deleted the stuff on her phone and computer. I think they recovered a lot of that, but they had Chris's phone too, but they didn't find any actual messages. That could just be that they were smart enough not to talk about it in a text. Um, If such plotting had occurred, it might have been spoken on that 111-minute phone call rather than written in a text, leaving little trails. Thus, scenario one remains speculative. It's a theory that sees Nicole Kessinger as a behind the scenes instigator of murder, essentially, that she wanted Chris to kill his family, and he obliged. It's a dark scenario that, if true, would make her an uncharged accomplice to heinous crimes. However, law enforcement did not find any proof of this. Officially, Kessinger was treated as a cooperating witness, not a suspect. The plausibility of this scenario largely depends on how one interprets Nicole's character and her actions, deleting the messages, her unusual searches, either as either as those of a guilty participant or simply a panicked bystander trying to distance herself from a man who turned out to be a monster. And I know a lot of you kind of think that scenario is very plausible. But I've got another scenario here. It's similar, but a little bit different. This scenario kind of flips the script. Instead of Nicole pressuring Chris, perhaps Chris was the one trying to back out of the relationship. It speculates that during that 111-minute phone call, Chris told Nicole that he wouldn't continue their affair, that he intended to stay with or reconcile with Shanann, possibly for the sake of his children and his unborn son. In this hypothetical situation, Chris might have essentially broken up with Nicole on that call, or at least expressed serious doubts about leaving his family. Such news could have provoked a highly emotional reaction from Nicole. Uh, she would have felt betrayed and lied to. The theory suggests that the fallout of this conversation would have led to Nicole's anger, to threats, despair. It was all triggered um, and it all triggered Chris to commit the murders in a twisted response. In essence, he might have killed Shanann and the children either out of a misplaced rage, blaming Shanann for driving him to this point, or as a warped way to fix the situation after Nicole's ultimatum to end the affair. How this might play out. If Chris indeed told Nicole, I can't leave my family or I have to stop this now, Nicole would have every reason to feel devastated and furious. Remember, by August 12th, Nicole thought Chris was on the cusp of a divorce. She had put her hopes into this relationship from her perspective. If Chris suddenly reversed course, it would be a profound betrayal. Psychological research on infidelity shows that when an affair partner feels duped, for example, if promises to leave a spouse are broken, the situation can escalate dramatically. Emotions like jealousy, anger, and hurt pride all come into play. It's in some cases, the betrayed lover might threaten to expose the affair out of spite. It's possible that if Nicole learned Chris was getting cold feet, she would have said something like, well, I'm going to tell your wife. If you go back to her, I will make sure everyone knows about us. She also could have simply lashed out in anger, telling him never to talk to her again. Now, if you put yourself in Chris Watts's mindset during and after this call in this scenario, he's on the verge of losing the woman he's infatuated with, and Nicole is possibly threatening to blow up his world by outing the affair to Shanann and everyone else he knows. At that same time, his marriage with Shanann was already falling apart. Shanann herself had been texting him that weekend trying to save the marriage. He had been noncommittal. By telling Nicole he wanted to end the affair, Chris might have been attempting to retreat for the safety of of his old life, perhaps feeling a little guilty. But if Nicole reacted explosively, Chris could have realized he was about to lose everything. The affair would come to light. Shanann would find out if well, we know she already kind of suspected a divorce would have been inevitable, and he would have ended up alone and publicly shamed. This kind of high stress, no win scenario can trigger extreme behavior. That shame that I'm talking about here is one of the main stressors in all family annihilation cases. There's this exposure moment where they're afraid that something is going to get exposed and they're going to lose their reputation. And this is what Chris most likely felt in this scenario. One possible trajectory is that Nicole's reaction, feeling betrayed, ignited Chris's fear and anger. Cases of intimate partner violence often show that the moment the partner tries to leave or end a relationship is the most dangerous. While typically that refers to a spouse leaving an abusive partner, here it could be the mistress leaving the adulterous husband. If Nicole essentially was dumped by Chris, um, she may have snapped psychologically after hanging up the phone. The thought process might have been twisted, but it could have gone something like, you know, she was just going to destroy everything that Chris loved, and everything would implode. In a fit of desperation, Chris might have decided that if Shanann and the children were gone, then in his irrational mind, Nicole might come back to him. So maybe he was trying to win Nicole back when he committed the murder. There are some hints that in the evidence that Chris may have been considering reconciliation with Shanann. And I suspect that that phone call was Chris's attempt to leave the affair, to drop it. It had only been a few months and they had gotten very close. But what can you really know about a person that you've been with for 2 months? And let's see. There's also another scenario. Let's see. So, scenario two suggests that the 111-minute call might have contained a dramatic breakup or an argument that was initiated by Chris, in which turn set off a chain reaction of anger, threats, and panic that led him to murder. It underscores how volatile extramarital affairs can become when one party abruptly pulls away, sometimes provoking violence, sometimes not. If Chris truly told Nichol that he was ending things and going back to Shanann, it could have been a short lived decision that inverted into the opposite. So within hours, he made sure reconciliation was no longer possible by ending Shanann's life. We have no direct confirmation that this is what happened in this, but in this scenario, it highlights a dangerous emotional current that could have been flowing through one that 111-minute phone call. Um, so in scenario three, Nichol Kessinger threatened to leave Chris. This I don't think people talk about too much. I know a lot of people bring up this guy Jim and they don't think that she was having a relationship with him, but I'm not so sure because I can't find much about the guy. But in this scenario, it's perhaps the most likely of the three, and it overlaps somewhat with scenario one, but with an important difference in tone. Here, Nichol Kessinger is not instigating murder, but she's putting pressure on Chris by threatening to end the relationship because she doubts his commitment. The idea is that on that 111-minute phone call, Nicole expressed serious frustration. Perhaps she told Chris she was done with him because he was clearly not making the moves um, to start divorcing his wife. She might have said she couldn't wait any longer or that she didn't believe his promises. Essentially, Nicole may have been on the verge of breaking up with Chris, telling him something like, I can't do this anymore. You keep saying that you're going to leave her, but you haven't. I'm going to walk away. And this would be an ultimatum of a different sort, not go kill your family, but show me you're really leaving your family or I'm gone. Under this scenario, Chris Watts would be terrified of losing his mistress, and the new life that he envisioned with her was driven by fear of abandonment to do the unthinkable. He chose to eliminate his family that very night in a twisted effort to demonstrate to Nicole that he was free of them, essentially to prevent her from leaving him. Evidence of Nicole's doubts. We've already touched on some of Kessinger's Google searches that indicate she was unsure about Chris's truthfulness. The search, man, I'm having an affair with, says he'll leave his wife on July 24th, shows Nicole was wrestling with whether or not to trust Chris. By late July, she knew he had not yet separated. He was still living at home. Shanann was posting loving Facebook posts about Chris, which Nicole could see. It's easy to see how Nicole would begin to doubt Chris's promises. On August 8th, when she searched marrying your mistress, it likely wasn't just fantasy. She may have been reading articles or forums about men who say they'll leave their wives but don't. In fact, many of those search terms mirror common advice column topics. We've all heard this stuff. He says he'll leave his wife. Should I believe him? So by the end of the second week of August, Nichol Kessinger was questioning Chris Watts's commitment. She later told the Denver Post that Chris lied to her about the state of his marriage. He had told her he was in the final stages of a mutual divorce, and she said, I believed him. I mean, would you believe somebody who says that? I think most of us would try to believe people if we don't have a reason not to. And yes, riding down the rabbit hole. I have heard that too, that she had been watching Shanann's Facebook posts for quite a while before she met Chris. Um, so she believed him. And when the truth emerged after the murders, Nichol said he lied about everything. This suggests that even before the murders, she was starting to catch him in lies. For example, when news broke that Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant, Nichol realized Chris had concealed that from her. And now that I think about it, if you're in an affair with somebody who's lying to people that he's not in an affair, like he's already a liar, how can you trust somebody like that? I'm just curious. Now we have to kind of consider the timing. August 12th was the day before Shanann's planned doctor appointment where they were going to find out the sex of the baby. It was a boy who they were planning to name Nico. Shanann had been excited about this, but Chris was strangely indifferent. It's possible Nichol learned Shanann was pregnant over that weekend. Maybe Chris finally admitted it, or she saw something online. So that could have been a breaking point for Nichol's patience. She might have felt Chris was never honest and that he was far from ending his marriage. If during that call, Nichol said something like, I can't do this, Chris. I'm going to end this affair because I don't think you're ever going to leave your wife, it would amount to a severe threat from Chris's perspective, the loss of the woman he's obsessed with. Unlike scenario two, where Chris instigates the ending of this, here Nichol is the one initiating the potential breakup. Fear of abandonment as a trigger. Chris Watts does not appear on the surface like someone who would panic at being alone. He was often described as quiet, stoic, and hard to read emotionally, but under that facade, he may have had a deep-seated fear of rejection or of his life falling apart. Family annihilators often have a controlling mindset. They view their family's possessions or uh, they view their families as possessions or as an extension of themselves. Chris's affair with Nichol fed his ego and gave him a sense of fresh identity. He had been losing weight, he'd been working out. He felt desired again and admired by somebody besides his wife. Losing Nichol would feel like losing the new happy life he imagined, which his current life, um, his current family life with his responsibilities and struggles could not compete with his mind. Thus, when faced, where I'm kind of losing my place here. Thus, when faced with Nichol saying she's going to leave, Chris might have resolved that he would not let that happen. In some domestic murders, perpetrators kill their partners when threatened with divorce or separation under the twisted logic, if I can't have you, no one will. In this case, Chris didn't harm Nichol. She was the one threatening to leave, but he did in turn hurt other people. Shanann and the girls were about to slip from his grasp, though through either divorce or removal if Shanann found out about the affair. So one could, hmm, so Chris is in this situation. If I lose control, if I lose Nicole, I might as well destroy everything. Or maybe even if I remove my family, Nicole won't leave after all because I'll be single and then I can fully devote myself to her. This latter twisted thought aligns with the idea that by dawn on August 13th, perhaps Chris thought he had solved the problem. He even texted Nicole that morning, casually saying, "My family's gone," as if he's gone. He was now free. Nicole would later recall that on August 13th and 14th, Chris seemed strangely calm about his missing family, which she found suspicious. Relationship psychology factors when discussing affairs like the one between Chris and Nicole are often fueled by fantasy. Chris was living in a fantasy with Nicole. He was sneaking around, going on dates, sending love notes, planning trips. Meanwhile, reality was waiting at home: a pregnant wife, two kids, a mortgage, and financial problems. The Watts family was in debt and they were headed for bankruptcy for a second time. The contrast between the fantasy and the reality is stark. For a person like Chris, who avoided conflict and perhaps who avoided conflict and perhaps conflict related decision making, the easiest way to keep the fantasy alive was to lie until he couldn't anymore. By August 12th, reality was crashing in. Nicole was effectively saying, "Face reality, either be with me or be with your wife, but this limbo can't continue." The fear of losing the fantasy, the fear of being left with the reality that he was trying to avoid could have created an extreme panic for Chris. In psychological terms, he likely experienced a phenomenon called acute stress reaction, a buildup of stressors, marital strife, family woes, a new baby, affair pressures, reaching a tipping point. The threat of abandonment by Nicole was the last straw that tipped him into a catastrophic decision. It's as if something said or decided on that 111-minute call that set Chris on a singular deadly course. Scenario 3 does not require Nicole to have wanted Chris to kill anyone. She only needed to express doubt and a readiness to leave him. All the murderous initiative could have come from Chris directly. This scenario is consistent with what prosecutors ultimately concluded: that Chris Watts killed his family to be with Nichol Kessinger, a plain and simple fact. In court, Weald County DA Michael Rourke said he had a desire for a fresh start, to begin a new relationship with a new love, and that was his motive. In other words, he would not lose this new love. He erased his old life so that he could be with Nichol Kessinger. Scenario 3 fits that motive perfectly. Nicole's role here is the catalyst by way of her potential abandonment of Chris, not a co-conspirator. Co-conspirator. There are some antecedent backings for this idea as well. Criminal profilers note that many family annihilators act when they feel like they're about to lose their spouse or family through separation. In one study, up to 74 to 85% of familicide cases involve prior relationship problems or impending breakups. Chris's case was unique because the relationship problem was an affair. It it still centers on a breakup, the breakup with the mistress if he didn't take action. In terms of plausibility, many followers of the case find scenario three, Nicole's threat to leave Chris, uh, and Chris's resulting desperation, to be the most in line with known facts. It neither exonerates nor over villainizes Nicole. It casts her as a catalyst, probably unknowingly. FBI agent Philip Jones, who interviewed Kessinger, said in reports that Kessinger was cooperative and horrified, implying she didn't know what was coming. Still, one can imagine that her words on that call were either angry, um, disappointment, or I'm done, echoed in Chris's mind as he laid in bed that night on a bare mattress, contemplating his next move. By all indications, that move was to ensure Nicole's doubts were erased permanently by erasing the people she doubted he would ever leave. And that's kind of all I have today, guys. So I guess, what do you guys think? Do you think that do you think 100% that she was guilty and that she helped him plan this? Or could it have been, you know, something she did unknowingly? Witchcraft? uh, I looked into the scenario about the OTO and I can't find anything about her in witchcraft. Somebody mentioned Nicole Kessinger had some kind of magic shop. Um, I don't think she owned anything, not that I've found. I could be wrong, but also didn't look terribly hard for that kind of information. Um, but uh, there, there's a lot of pieces to this story that I can't tell for sure if they're real or not. Um, so I just have to go by what I can find. And the weird thing about it all is that there's like nothing to find anywhere. So I know somebody's like, you know, cleaning the internet of all these things, all the proof. Um, And I did talk about that in one of my videos where I talked about the cost involved from erasing yourself from the internet. It's not a cheap process, but it can be done. And you can basically, it's like if you Google Nicole Kessinger, the only information you find is after August of 2018. There's almost nothing you can find anywhere else. And when you do find something somewhere else, it's really like third person kind of information. Well, anyways, guys, I think I've got to get off of here. I need to call my kids and see how they're doing before they go to bed tonight. But I do appreciate you guys watching this. I hope you have hit the heart button a lot and, like the video, maybe let it play in the background a couple times. So the ad rolls will go and maybe I'll get some money out of it. Just so you guys know, I don't really make any money on my YouTube channel yet. So I do all this for free. um, But anyways, I do have a video that I'm writing and I plan to record tonight, and it's actually going to be about the affair. It's going to sound, I think it's going to sound a little bit preachy about affairs in the workplace, but it is important stuff to think about when you consider Chris Watts's motive in the end. It shows all the driving forces that could have stirred the pot and directed him the direction he went. Um, but thank you, Lauren. Yeah, I really don't know what I'm doing with these lives, but I'm trying. I'm trying to do them. I know other creators are they have B rolls. I don't even know exactly what a B roll is, but I don't have one. But I do a lot of research and I spend a lot of time writing. And I don't know, I found probably 20 different scenarios that I've written out that I was going to turn into a script and make a video out of that I never did. So um, I don't know. I feel weird posting videos on the same kind of topic all the time. So I feel like if I don't ch add something to it, then it's not really worth my time because I like, being interesting. I like finding interesting things to say. I don't wanna just regurgitate information all the time. It's kind of boring, sadly, but oops, I think I moved that. Yeah. Yeah. I I don't know, it's weird. I can't look at myself when I'm doing this. So I put like a Word document right in front of my face so that I can't look at how weird I look. But yeah. So yeah, if you haven't watched my Golden State Killer video, please watch it. Please like it. Even if you don't like it, don't tell anybody you don't like it. you know, let it play in the background. Listen to it. I think I did a really good job telling the story in an interesting way that you may not have heard before. It's mostly about a one specific case, and it kind of like ties into all of his other cases and how he got caught. But I think the overall theme is actually one particular case, and it's really interesting. I think you should check it out and give it a thumbs up. But anyways, guys, so I'm gonna try to do lives more often, maybe a couple times during the week. Um, I get off work at like 4:30 ish. It depends. Sometimes I get out of work late, so I'm thinking if I aim for like 6 or 7, I'm in Alaska, so that's kind of late. But I might try to get a couple live streams in. Um, every week and see if I can get better at this. So let's see. The top 40 weird moments with Kessinger. Yeah, that's going to be interesting. I'm looking forward to seeing that. Is there really 40 or is there just more like 10? Or is there more than 40? um, I don't know. The first time I watched that video of her interview, like I was just like, "Oh my god, she did it." Uh, and I think a lot of people felt that way too. Um, but um, it's hard to say for sure. One thing I found out when I was doing the Golden State Killer video, I was researching some of the old theories about the case that I talk about in the Golden State Killer video. Um, they had all these weird ideas and all these weird speculative scenarios of how they got killed, why they got killed, and all these things weren't not true. But if they wouldn't have had those conversations, it wouldn't have like kept the case alive, and people kept trying to figure out who he was, and that's how they caught him. Keeping that conversation alive is important. But anyways, guys, I got to get going. So as always, stay kind, be vigilant, and always question the truth. I'll see you in the next video.